All right. So thanks for your patience with our technology. This part of what I am hoping you are willing to do for GeoCivics is to think about the sequence of this. I would actually, before we have done the giant map, maybe talk about the census, but maybe you would think that it was better to wait until we're done with the giant map. So anyway, I'll be interested to hear what you think is makes the most sense for your classes and really what you want to communicate to your students. Now, the other thing to remember is that I am a political geographer. I can spend 3 weeks on redistricting with my students. You all don't have that luxury. So what I really want to know is what are the essential pieces of information that you think are key to getting your students to understanding this important topic. So we really want to think about who we're voting with, right? And what I would like to make sure we understand is the census, how the redistricting process works, and then kind of this next step, which is still in process, is evaluating these plans. And then we'll be doing some of that tomorrow as well. So just remember, our primary purpose for the census, as is in the Constitution, is to count everyone, in the right place for one time. And we've just had the revision, right, that says many people in places that we expected were double counted, and in other places were undercounted. And so that's a challenge for representation as well as funding. So we were looking at our activity here, and you can see I also use plastic dinosaurs, right? So whatever you have, go to the store and check it out. But you can see the point of this really is don't leave money on the table by not getting counted. And so in some ways that really motivates people more than representation. And then you can also think about how much your state depends on federal funding, right? And you can think about why those darker states, right? Alaska is really a place that has a great dependence on federal funding, as does, New Mexico, Montana. So you might want to have students go through at some point and take the census. When I was just reminding people that they should be part of the census, they really didn't understand what it was or what they were supposed to do. So just maybe at some point in civics class, they need to take the census as a practice. If you are, just thinking about how you describe people, right? The census doesn't only get used now for representation, it is used as the basis for so many different organizations that use that data, and then they layer much more information on it. So this is the tapestry segmentation from ESRI through online mapping. Of course, this is the real point of the census, is the apportionment. Oklahoma did not change in its number of districts, although Colorado did. And so we will be experiencing one of the most competitive districts in the country this year, which is really great in terms of the process. And I really feel for the people who live in that district or are near that media market, because it's really going to be a doozy. Redistricting week at your school, how can you thread this through? This is probably less relevant because it's not top of mind for everybody, but why not? It really affects all of these different disciplines. And so even if you're talking with people certainly about math, right, but even about science, right, if you're thinking about water distribution, right, you're going to be talking to people about representation. So anyway, just a thought about how to get out of your silos. This is the new director of the census, who is of Hispanic origin. So that's the first time that somebody of that ethnicity has been part of the census. So we'll certainly be, kind of looking at what he does going forward. And there's so much information on the census website. There's census in the schools, and that's the geography teacher, just a little page out there that has the table of contents. That just gives you kind of an overview and some guides to what the census has for you. But of course, we really want to think about who lives where, right? And rural versus urban is really one of the big divisions in almost every state. So it's pretty interesting that the projections were pretty good, right? No one was surprised, for instance, that Colorado got another representative or that Ohio lost a representative. So over time, right, the projections that are done by demographers and that are counted in the interim census surveys are pretty accurate. And there's just a giant number of interactive maps on the census. So, it might behoove you at some point to just turn your students loose and ask them to explore the census website. Oh, yeah. Oh, yes, do not even attempt to write all of this down. So, right, it's also interesting if you're looking historically, right? How did your state change over time? And particularly before 1960, when they said, hey, you really do need to have districts of equal size. And that applies not only to congressional districts, but also to state, House, and Senate. And so for many, many years, we think of this as being, in the South, Alabama was where they, just the rural districts just kept being the same size, even though there were more and more people in the urban areas, most of whom were African American, who were, didn't have the same representation. But same thing happened in Colorado. We did not change the size of our districts for several redistricting rounds until the court case Reynolds v. Sims came through. So there's just looking at the historical data can also be instructive. And again, just census data is out there to explore and answer a variety of questions. So there's almost, right, too much information. And again, that's what I would really like to know from you is, wow, in our state, the most important thing to understand historically is X, and the thing we need to understand currently is Y, right? And how can I use the census data to inform our students about that? So just thinking about different approaches. This demographics racial dot map, right? A really amazing tool that you can see. And of course, you can use it at different scales as well. And here's the diversity index by state. So Oklahoma, kind of there in the middle in terms of diversity. And distribution of school enrollment, right? Just things that I think we get stuck not using data for sometimes for social science approaches. And so it's really good to remember what the data is telling us. And you can also look up state profiles. All right, so here is the GeoCivics website. Mainly the point here is to understand the population, right? And I like to start with those population over time in order to help people understand that their state didn't always look like it does today. And so for Colorado, larger cities were on the western slope where we were mining. And so those cities have historical perspectives that they want to make sure are shared at the State House. And the challenges with having everybody living in Denver is that the people in the rural areas are like, well, nobody ever cares about us. So again, we need to understand how those states looked over time. Then what we're going to do in just a bit is talk about the criteria, which you were talking about earlier. Yes, exactly. I think if you teach nothing else, the important thing to teach is criteria, because what you prioritize in terms of your criteria is how the map is drawn. And where we are in about half the states today is party advantage, because that is the most important thing. It doesn't matter anything else. And tomorrow I'll show you Dave's redistricting app, which has some great opportunities for looking at ways to prioritize different criteria on maps. And I think that we do not talk about that enough, either in the classroom or the political commentators. They really have a very narrow focus. And then part of the reason I started GeoCivics is because I'm concerned that we are not teaching our students enough geospatial technology. And if they don't understand how the maps are made, then they're going to be manipulated. And not just with representation, right, but with many other aspects as well. So here's a TED Talk, which is probably the most efficient thing to watch about what I say. So that is linked on the website. And we've got how to use this website. But again, I really want to revamp this. So part of what I'm going to be asking you in a follow-up is, all right, what's your ideas about how you might use this in the fall? And then, like, after you've used it, tell me how can we make this better? Because I want this to be, it's really not going to be updated a lot. I mean, once we've got our districts and the census, there's not really much else to say, but we need to keep teaching our students. So I really need to know how to prioritize, for your colleagues. And there's just a ton of resources, but there's almost too many resources, right? So what is essential? How can I say, all right, if you have, a day and a half, teach this. If you have a week that you want to teach, use that. So again, I'm not only sharing these materials with you, but I really am looking for your input. Okay. And again, we've got another, teaching about redistricting webinar from Retro Report. Anybody familiar with Retro Report? They're using documentaries as jumping off points, and so I think a really a good resource. So again, you'll get this information. And there was for geographers, there was a series of redistricting panels. Oklahoma did not host one, but they really are a great cross-disciplinary conversation with academic geographers as well as political active folks. So people in the different states who are explaining the process there. So you've seen the On the Move lesson. And again, I like it because it's interactive, gets people out walking around. This happens to be in Ohio. And so you can see, right, that the map looks a little bit different, and Ohio's cities are spread out a little more. Ohio is a really nice, handy map. You can actually divide your quadrants fairly efficiently. And obviously you can use your Legos. And then we're going to talk here about the redistricting criteria. So the federal requirements are, of course, equal population and not to violate the Voting Rights Act. Those are the key things you have to start with. And then you're going to have different guidelines, not only for your state, but then also for other local jurisdictions as well. And so, here's how we use this with students, right? You just sit around and have a conversation about it. And again, it enables, having the cards enables them to order these and to have some interaction and conversation. But we also, during the pandemic, put this up online so that if you're teaching in an online class, or maybe this is something that you don't have time to do in your classroom, you could have students order these criteria on a like a game board. So that's available as well. So I'm going to go back to that. So this activity, the Flashes of Insight, was created by Draw the Lines PA. And if we had Draw the Lines PA in every state, we would not need GeoCivics, because they are fantastic. They have great resources. I would definitely go to them for more materials, teaching about redistricting. But I was very lucky to end up with a set of these flashcards. These are all available online. You can download them and print them off however you like. They're also in Spanish, thanks to some folks in Colorado. And the point here is to read through the criteria. So you've got a example of a criteria on the front and then a brief description on the back. These are the Pennsylvania criteria, but they're not dissimilar to what you're going to find in other jurisdictions. There's also a wild card. So if there was something particular to Oklahoma, then you could, you could add that in. So we're going to end the day by you all kind of pairing up. I've got 10, I think. So yeah, if you could just pair up and then everybody could have a set of cards. And again, I've got some cards to give away, but some I have to keep. And then everybody can take an instruction here. Good boy. Okay. So you want to think about the most important one, and you can use it either going up or down, right? You could say, I'm going to make the foundation of my list at the bottom, or I'm going to put the most important thing at the top. Okay. How about if the two of you here and you guys there? Okay. 1, 2. Oh, sure. There we go. Thank you. Okay, you guys, and let's see, can you and Sheila, are we gonna, no, maybe it's the three of you. Are you gonna, you're gonna do it though?
I can do it.
Yeah, you should do it. Okay. All right. So why don't you, the two of you here, and yep. And here you go. All right. So I would say take about 10 minutes and then we'll do kind of just a debriefing at the end. Okay. Okay, so I haven't talked to all of you, but I've been interested in how you're choosing to have this conversation with yourselves, right? And wondering if it might be different with your students. So I'm going to use you as the example over here because I came over and like they've got equal population kind of in the middle. And, I was trying to be really clear and say equal population is a federal requirement, right? You have to have that. But the argument was, well, it is required, so we have to do it anyway, so we're not going to worry about it, right? So it's not a priority.
It's not a priority because we have to do it.
Right. And
that makes it a priority. Well, no, we're going to do it, but we don't have to, but you need to organize it. We don't have to, yeah.
So again, you might want to think about how that's your view, but maybe we really want to make sure that students understand equal population is essential to this process. And how are you all thinking about it back here?
Us?
Yeah.
We had at the very top.
That was number one.
Mm-hmm. And then you had the question about compactness. Can you re-explain what I said?
Oh, it's where they make the district kind of squiggly line or takes a loop kind of off shape that maybe you have a square on the opposite. It goes like way out there or slender. Did I say that correct?
Right. And so the issue is, are there ways to measure districts that are not compact? Because during the Supreme Court case that Chief Justice John Roberts said, well, social science gobbledygook, we don't really understand this. People came back and said, okay, well, let us provide you with some effective measures, right? The Polsby-Popper score, there's a whole set of mathematical equations that you can look at to say this particular district is not compact, and so therefore it might be suspect.
I guess what I mean about equal population is we don't have to have a conversation about it. It's not up for debate. It's mandatory.
Right, but then how you divide those, and that's what I really want to get to.
And so how we divide them is then we look at communities of interest. And so that's like, Once you look at your communities of interest, then make sure you have the reconciliation.
right. And you, Allison, you and some of your name, yep, yeah, Cameron, you had equal population kind of more in the middle as well.
Yeah, we kind of went for the same thing. We originally had it at the top, but like discussed that if it was something that had to happen, maybe communities of interest would.
Same logic.
Okay. And other thoughts over here? I didn't.
We had it in the middle as well.
Okay. All right. So do you think, though, that that's going to be confusing to students?
I think it's confusing to reapportionment committees too.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't say that this is the most important thing, that you are federally mandated to do this, then people are like, oh, then we don't have to care about. Like, there's a percentage off of the median that you have to be within population. So like, while I understand what you're talking about, like, it has to be number one because it is the thing that is most important. Like, not in this, like, I guess, theoretical conversation that we're having, but because it is the federal mandate to say that they have to be as close in population distribution from one another as they possibly can. I guess that's where I understand what you're saying, like, in terms of like the conversation about like priorities. Like, I think it just goes at the top and you forget about it and then rank everything else. That's the way that I looked at it.
And that quantitative versus qualitative, I mean. So.
Yes. So watch my TED Talk, and I do make that point. It's actually easier. So I will have my students divide the state into equal population, and they're just desperate, right, to make everything equal. And then they kind of realize that, oh, maybe I need to go back and look and see what I've actually divided.
That's why I wanted to look at the neighborhoods first.
Mhm.
So that you're not dividing like communities of interest.
Right. So
And so they don't have to go back.
Yeah. So what we're going to do tomorrow is lead up to your dividing your state. And we will start with some exercises and dividing by counties. But then I want you to get onto these community available websites where you can actually do the dividing. And this is why there's no reason to reinvent this. People with money have already put this together. We should use these resources in the classroom, and we should enable our students to be participants in this process going forward. Not all of them will, but there's enough, more people the better. So eventually you'll see on your screens that there'll be, okay, you have divided, you have made this district and it is off or it is accurate by so many. So in some ways you're right, that you kind of put it up there and forget it, but it also informs everything you do and how you move things around. So it also just makes everybody much more appreciative of the difficult task of these redistricting commissions, who are the ones who are at least really trying to make these decisions. Okay, so all right, let's leave the discussion of equal population and know that it is a federal requirement. What else is important? I've heard a couple people say communities of interest.
Well, then contiguous is also a federal requirement.
Yes, is contiguous, right?
Minority representation.
And often that is stated as not preventing minorities from being able to elect a representative of their choice, rather than saying you must elect a minority to represent this community. So it's kind of a tricky discussion.
Is this, I'm thinking along the lines, I can't remember which Carolina it was, but my refresh. This is the minority representation. What was the case that the Supreme Court had, where it was like just a block essentially, and then like it was along one street where a minority was population resided, and they lumped them in just to cancel out because they were, I think they tend to vote more Democratic. They lumped them in with the Republican Party. Is that ringing a bell?
So that's North Carolina. Right. And if you look at North Carolina, basically there's cracking and packing. And I'm assuming these are not new terms to you, but cracking is what has happened in Oklahoma City. in Nashville, in Salt Lake, where you crack basically a block of Democratic votes. That happens to be because Democrats are more concentrated in cities, and then split those off. It's really obvious in Utah, for instance. So you've got Salt Lake City, and you just divide it into 4 quadrants, and those go off with the more rural Republican voters, and as opposed to creating a district that would be Salt Lake City. So that's cracking. Packing is really what happened in North Carolina, which is where they drew majority Black cities all in one kind of snaky district. Or along the lake in Ohio, they drew cities so that they could all be connected as well. And so what I see is that really goes directly against the keeping municipalities and counties together. And I argue that that's really one of the places you should start, is even before communities of interest, look at what happens when you do not divide cities, when you don't divide counties. You really have much more logical divisions in every state, and it's fairer. It's when you start to make those kind of manipulations that's more challenging. So where did people put the keeping the county municipal splits? Where did those end up? Was that high of importance or low? Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So pretty high. And that should be something that people of different political perspectives could get behind. You would think that it's something that you would want to keep those cities together. And of course, there are disputes, right? Would it be better to have a city divided and have multiple representations? So you could make that argument. But on the other hand, there's a really great example of how some city in California had a giant snowstorm unexpectedly, and it was divided by 3 representatives, and nobody was taking responsibility. Yeah. So it kind of works both ways. Do you have an observation?
Just that argument was used in the Oklahoma City case.
Mm.
By breaking the county into 2 districts, that gave the county more power than less.
Right, exactly. And one could use that discussion about incumbents as well, right? So that Texas, for instance, has had a priority to having incumbents in Congress, and they have a lot of committee chairs, right, as a result. Or they did, maybe not right now. Okay, other observations as you wind down. Party advantage, incumbent protection. No.
I put them low.
Yeah.
We banned those. Moved them up and threw them away.
But again,
Gary and I talked about party advantage and competitive elections and the relationship between those 2 things that so often we think of, competitive election, competitive districts being the antithesis of party advantage, and that is often the case. But like in Oklahoma, we could have drawn for example, our state Senate map with more competitive districts, but those districts that could be drawn more competitive were in the metro areas, so they lean Democratic now. If you made them more competitive, you would most likely lose those districts, and so you would be essentially giving more advantage to Republicans. And so in such a slanted state like this, to draw some districts to competitive is essentially to give them to the other party. And so, and that's, as someone who's very involved in redistricting here, we said that the way that they ended up drawing the states and in state house districts was honestly about as fair as you could do it to maintain not that there's balance in the chambers, but like to the extent there's balance in the chambers, that was the best way.
right.
Otherwise, they were going to go from a 85 seat majority to a 92 seat majority.
Right. And so drawing competitive districts is sometimes just doesn't work. In Colorado, if we wanted to have all 8 congressional districts be competitive, they would look stupid, because you would have basically a pie going out from Denver to all the rural areas. And those are not, like you when you were looking at the map, you were saying, should the people out in the panhandle be represented with the people in Oklahoma City? Is that make sense?
No.
That's what every district in Colorado would have to look like to be competitive, right? So what do you trade off? And that's the other piece here that's really important. So tomorrow we're going to be, for my sessions at least, spending a lot more time on your computers. So I'm sorry about that, but please bring your computer and be ready to kind of, go into these resources. I'm not necessarily expecting that we're going to finish all of these exercises, but I want you to get into them so that you can then guide your students, if you feel like you want to do that. And again, the other thing, I can assign my students to finish these 3 kind of lessons that build up to the redistricting part. You might not have that luxury. What can we do that's really most efficient? So I'm looking for that vision. All right.